Last year, 31 newborn Bobbies were found discarded in dumpsters, backpacks, and alleys across America. But for every one left to die, another was left to live, placed gently on a porch, in a church, or inside a safe haven box by a parent with no other choice. These safe haven laws exist in all 50 states, a modern solution to an ancient, desperate act. But long before these anonymous drop boxes, there were other traditions, informal, unrecorded arrangements where a child's future was decided not by the state, but by a silent, moonlit test of character. This is the story of one such arrangement, a mystery that unfolded not in a hospital but on the wooden porch of a solitary ranch, under the watchful eye of a full moon. The test would take place in the high desert of New Mexico, on land owned by a man named Samuel Thompson. At 33, Samuel understood silence. He understood the loneliness of wind through canyon rock and the empty echo of a house with only one set of footsteps. His small horse ranch was his entire world, a world he had built alone after losing his family young, a world where the closest neighbor lived 3 kilometers away. He was a man who believed in tangible things, a well-built fence, a healthy horse, the weight of a hammer in his hand. He did not believe in mysteries, not until the first full moon of spring. That night Samuel was awakened not by a sound but by a feeling, the visceral sense of another presence on his property. He took his rifle and lantern and stepped onto the porch. The silver-blue light of the moon washed over the desert, painting everything in cold, stark detail. And there on the rough-hewn planks of his porch was a bundle, not trash, not an animal, a bundle of tightly woven cloth, the kind used by the Apache bands that sometimes pass through the distant hills. His heart hammered against his ribs. He knelt, setting the lantern down. With careful, calloused hands, he peeled back the top layer of cloth, and he froze. Inside was an infant, maybe 2 months old, sleeping peacefully. The child was clean-fed, wrapped securely against the desert chill. A small, carved wooden bird, a lark, was tucked into the folds. There was no note, no cry, just a sleeping baby on a stranger's porch under a full moon. Samuel's mind raced through logical explanations. An accident, a mother in distress who meant to come back. He brought the child inside, his large hands impossibly gentle. He warmed some milk, fashioned a crude bottle, and the baby ate, dark eyes blinking up at him with a trust that shattered his cultivated solitude. He sat in his rocking chair all night, holding this silent, mysterious child, watching the moon travel across the sky. Just before dawn, as the first gray light touched the eastern horizon, he made a decision. He would take the child to the authorities in the nearest town at first light. This was not his responsibility. This was a problem for the sheriff, for the county. He bundled the child back up, placed the wooden lark in his pocket, and rode out. But at the county office, the story sounded insane even to his own ears. A baby left by ghosts. The skeptical deputy took notes, but the system was slow, ill-equipped for a mystery. With no missing persons report matching the description, the immediate path led to an overcrowded county orphanage, a bleak, impersonal place Samuel had heard terrible things about. He looked down at the child in his arms, who had not cried once during the long ride. He thought of the careful wrapping, the clean clothes, the carved bird. This was not abandonment born of neglect. This was something else, something intentional. "I'll keep the child tonight," he heard himself tell the deputy, "until you find the mother." It was a temporary fix, a bridge to a solution. He told himself it was just for one more night. The next evening, as the sun set, Samuel placed the baby in a basket by the hearth. He slept fitfully, rising often to check. At daybreak, the child was still there. He felt a foolish pang of disappointment. What had he expected? A week passed. Then 2. Samuel, who had never cared for anything more fragile than a newborn colt, learned. He learned to prepare formula, to soothe a fussy stomach with a warm cloth, to sing old cowboy lullabies in a rough, unpracticed voice. He named the child Jonah after no one in particular, just a name that felt solid. The carved lark sat on his mantelpiece. He began to wonder if he had imagined the whole surreal event. Maybe the mother had met with some tragedy. Maybe Jonah was his now. Then the second full moon arrived. Samuel was awake, watching the moonrise, a new habit born of unease. He didn't hear a horse, he didn't see a figure, but a soft rustle like moccasins on dry earth made him bolt to the door. He flung it open, lantern held high. The porch was empty. His heart sank. But as he turned to go back inside, the light caught the edge of a familiar weave. There, in the exact same spot, was another bundle. He ran to it, his hands trembling. This time it was a baby girl, slightly younger than Jonah, with the same dark, observant eyes. She too was fed clean and wrapped with meticulous care. A second carved animal, a fox, lay nestled in the blankets. Samuel stood there, two bobbies now in his house, the vast, silent desert seeming to mock his understanding of the world. He reported the second child. The deputy was now deeply suspicious. Two bobbies, left on the same porch a month apart. It sounded like a scheme, a way for a single man to acquire children outside the law. Samuel felt the walls closing in. The system saw a potential criminal, not a witness to a ritual. He took the girl home, naming her Lily. He now had two infants, a ranch to run, and a mystery that was deepening into something terrifying and beautiful. The pattern held with the precision of the lunar calendar. The third full moon brought a third baby, a boy with a solemn gaze and a carved bear. The fourth moon brought a fourth, a girl who gripped his finger with surprising strength, a badger carved beside her. His small house was now a nursery. The people in town whispered. The deputy made vague threats about investigations. Samuel's savings dwindled as he bought formula, cloth, and medicines. He was exhausted, anchored to the ranch by four tiny, dependent lives. But in that exhaustion was a fierce, protective love he had never allowed himself to feel. These children were not his, yet they were his entire world. But with the fourth child came a shift in the mystery. The mother, for he now knew it must be a single mother, executing this plan with breathtaking stealth, had left something different. Alongside the badger was a small, perfect basket, woven from sweetgrass and yucca fibers. It was not just a container, it was a piece of art, a signature. And tucked deep within its weave was a single, long, black hair. Samuel held the hair to the lantern light. It was a clue, a tangible connection to the phantom. The silent test, he realized, was over. She had been observing him. She had seen him struggle, seen him learn, seen him love these children without question. The 4 lunar cycles were a trial, and he somehow had passed. Now she was revealing herself, not with a note but with a trail. The basket was of a design used by a specific band of Apache, those who lived in the most remote, inaccessible canyons to the north. The hair was a direct challenge. He looked at the 4 sleeping children, then out at the moon-washed desert where a single set of faint tracks led away from his porch and vanished into the rocky hills. The time for passive waiting was over. The mother had judged him worthy to raise her children, but Samuel needed answers. He needed to look her in the eye and understand why. At dawn, he would saddle his best horse. He would take the hair, the baskets, and the carved animals. He would follow that fatting trail into the heart of the desert. He would find the woman who had trusted him with her most precious treasures, and he would bring her back, or learn the terrible reason she could not stay. At dawn, Samuel Thompson did what no rational man would do. He left 4 infants in the care of his elderly neighbors, the Martinezes, with a month's supply of formula and a promise to return within 3 days. Then he turned his horse north, toward the most broken and remote canyons on the map, following a trail that was less a path and more a story written in the sand. The first day was straightforward. The tracks were clear, the light imprint of moccasins, the occasional pressed grass where she had rested. She was traveling fast and light, but she wasn't hiding. In fact, as Samuel soon realized, she was guiding him. A small pile of stones here, a broken branch there, all pointing north. She wanted to be found. But why lead him on a days-long chase through the desert? Why not just come to the door? By the afternoon of the second day, the landscape changed. The open desert gave way to a labyrinth of red rock canyons, a place the local cowboys called the Devil's Chessboard. Here, the trail vanished on solid stone. Samuel dismounted, frustration mounting. He was about to turn back when the sun caught a glint of color wedged in a crack 10 feet up a cliff face. He climbed, fingers scraping on rough rock. It was a bead, a tiny, perfectly formed turquoise bead. He looked ahead and saw another 20 yards away, nestled at the base of a cactus. A breadcrumb trail. She wasn't just leading him, she was testing his eyesight, his patience, his willingness to follow even when the way seemed lost. He camped that night in a shallow cave, chewing on dried beef. The silence of the canyons was absolute, a pressure on the ears. He took out the 4 carved animals from his saddlebag, the lark, the fox, the bear, the badger, and lined them up by his small fire. In the flickering light, he saw what he'd missed before. Each animal was depicted not in a neutral pose, but in an act of protection. The lark covered smaller birds with its wing. The fox stood guard at a den entrance. The bear stood on its hind legs, facing an unseen threat. The badger was shown digging, creating a shelter. They weren't just toys, they were instructions, symbols of guardianship. The message was chillingly clear. She had chosen him not as a temporary stopgap, but as a permanent protector. But from what? On the morning of the 3rd day, Samuel found the basket. It was hanging from a juniper branch at the mouth of a narrow, shadowed canyon. Not the sweetgrass basket from the porch, but a larger, sturdier one containing dried meat, nuts, and a sealed water skin. Provisions. She was feeding him now. The canyon ahead was a slit in the earth, so narrow his horse would not fit. He tied the animal securely, took the supplies, and entered on foot. The walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, leaving only a sliver of sky. The air grew cool and damp. After an hour of walking, the canyon opened into a hidden valley, a secret pocket of green in the red rock. And there, by a small spring, stood a wickiup, a traditional Apache dome-shaped dwelling made of brush and hides. His hand went to his rifle, then fell away. This was not a place for weapons. He called out, his voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "Hello, I've come for answers." For a long moment, there was only the sound of the spring. Then the hide covering the wickiup entrance was pushed aside, and a woman stepped out. She was younger than he expected, perhaps in her mid-20s, with the same penetrating dark eyes as the children. Her black hair was loose, falling past her waist. She wore a simple buckskin dress, and her face was a mask of exhaustion and fierce resolve. She said nothing, merely studied him, her gaze traveling from his dusty boots to his weathered face. Samuel held up the carved fox. "You left these, you left asterisk them. Why?" The woman's eyes flickered to the carving, then back to his. When she spoke, her English was clear, lightly accented. "You came, I wondered if you would." "Of course I came," Samuel said, a month of sleepless nights and worry sharpening his voice. "You left 4 bobbies on my porch, I deserve to know why." She gestured to a flat rock by the spring. "Sit, I will tell you a story. And then you will understand why I could not just knock on your door." Her name was Kai, she said. She was of the Nakedi, a small band that had splintered from a larger Apache group years ago over a point of honor, a dispute about hunting grounds that had festered into a blood feud. Her band, led by her uncle, was traditional, isolated. The larger band, led by a man named Kajawa, saw them as traitors, as ghosts to be wiped from the land. "For 5 years we have been shadows," Kai said, her voice flat. "We move every moon. We take only what we need. We have no permanent home, only places to hide. This," she gestured to the hidden valley, "is one such place. We will be gone by tomorrow." Samuel felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. "And the children?" Kai looked away toward the wickiup. "My first, the boy you call Jonah, was born 2 years ago. His father was killed in a raid when I was heavy with him. I raised him in hiding, but when he began to walk, to laugh, his noise was a danger. Our band has a rule, a terrible, necessary rule. No children under the age of 5 may travel with us. Their cries, their needs, they are like a beacon to Kajawa's scouts." She met his eyes, hers blazing with a pain so raw it was physical. "We leave them. We have always left them. With distant families in other tribes, with Mexican settlements, sometimes just in a safe place with food, hoping someone kind will find them before the wolves or the sun do." Samuel felt the world tilt. The careful, lunar abandonments were not a unique ritual for him. They were a brutal, ongoing tradition of a people on the brink of extinction. "You're their mother," he whispered. "All of them," Kai nodded. "Jonah, then Lily, then Ben, then little Sarah, each born in a different hiding place. Each left on a full moon when the light is bright enough for me to travel fast at night, but when my band is too busy preparing to move to notice one woman slipping away." She had, she explained, been leaving her children for over 2 years. She would travel for days to find a settlement far from their current location, leave the child, and return before her absence was noted. The carved animals were her only keepsake for them, a piece of her heart she could send along. "But why me?" Samuel asked, his throat tight. "Why the same porch?" For the first time, a flicker of something besides grief touched Kai's face. "The first time was chance. I saw your ranch from a ridge. It was alone but well kept. The chimney had smoke. It meant someone was home, someone capable. I left Jonah, but then I watched. I came back on the next moon and the next. I saw you ride to town and return without him. I saw you hang laundry, small clothes. I saw you building a bigger corral like you were planning for more. You did not take him to an orphanage. You kept him. You learned." She leaned forward. "You were not just a safe place. You were a good place, so I brought Lily, and you kept her too. You built a second crib. You were being tested, Samuel Thompson, but not by some ancient ritual. You were being tested by a mother's desperation. And with every child you accepted, you proved my hope was not in vain." The revelation was a hammer blow. The majestic, mysterious test was in reality a series of desperate gambles by a woman with no other options. The weight of it crushed Samuel's earlier anger, replacing it with a staggering awe. "So you've been watching me all this time. Why reveal yourself now? Why lead me here?" Kai's expression hardened. "Because the pattern is broken. Kajawa's men found one of our old camps 2 weeks ago. They are close. We must run further and faster than ever before. There will be no more journeys to your porch. There will be no more children." She paused, and her next words were barely audible. "And because I cannot say goodbye to them, but I can say thank you to you." Samuel sat in stunned silence. The entire narrative he had built in his mind, of a mystical choice, of being selected for a sacred duty, evaporated, replaced by the harsh, human truth of war, loss, and a mother's impossible love. He was not a chosen guardian, he was a last resort. And yet in that truth, his role felt more profound, more terrifyingly real. He was about to speak, to ask what he could do, when a sharp, echoing crack split the air. Not thunder, a rifle shot. Kai was on her feet in an instant, her body coiled like a spring. From the narrow canyon entrance came a shout in Apache, followed by the sound of scrambling feet on rock. Kai's eyes locked with Samuel, filled not with fear but with a furious resignation. "They are here, Kajawa's men. They must have followed you." Samuel's blood ran cold. He had led death right to her doorstep. "Come with me," he said urgently, grabbing his rifle. "We can make it back to my horse." Kai shook her head, backing toward the wickiup. "You must go now. Take the other canyon exit behind the spring. It leads to a pass. If you run, you might live." "I'm not leaving you," Samuel growled. Another shot ricocheted off the canyon wall above them. Kai's voice became a command. "You have my children. Your duty is to them, not to me. Go, or everything is lost." She turned and darted into the wickiup. Samuel stood frozen for a second, torn between the instinct to fight and the crushing weight of her words. Then he heard a child's cry, thin and frightened, from inside the structure. It was a sound that changed everything. There was a fifth child, one she had not left on his porch, one she had kept. The cry from the wickiup was not an infant's wail, but the scared whimper of a toddler. Before Samuel could move, Kai emerged, not with a baby, but with a small boy of perhaps 3 years old clinging to her leg. In her other hand, she held a knife. "His name is Elan," she said, her voice a blade of its own. "And they will kill him first." Samuel's mind, already reeling, tried to process this fifth child, this secret she had kept. Elan was the firstborn, the one she could not bring herself to leave. The logic was instantly, horrifically clear. A boy, an heir. In the eyes of Kajawa and his men, Elan represented the future of the Nakedi band, a future they were determined to extinguish. They wouldn't just take him, they would make an example of him. Shouts echoed closer from the canyon entrance. There was no more time for talk. Samuel made a decision in the space of a heartbeat. He wasn't leaving a woman and a child to be slaughtered. He grabbed Kai's arm. "The other exit. Now you carry him, I'll cover us." For a second, defiance flashed in her eyes. This was her fight, not his, but the practical need to survive overruled pride. She nodded, sheathed the knife, and scooped Elan onto her hip. They ran for the narrow crack behind the spring that Kai had called an exit. It was less a path and more a vertical slit in the rock, damp and mossy. Samuel urged them through first, then turned, rifle raised, facing back toward the main canyon. He saw 3 figures emerge into the valley, armed with rifles and painted for war. They spotted the abandoned wickiup, then him. A shot rang out, chipping stone near his head. Samuel fired back, not to hit, but to make them take cover. The thunder of the shot in the confined space was deafening. Then he plunged into the dark, narrow passage after Kai. What followed was a claustrophobic nightmare. They scrambled up sloping rock, through tunnels so tight they had to turn sideways, the gurgle of an underground stream masking their sounds. Elan, terrified, buried his face in Kai's neck but did not cry out. The child had been trained in silence from birth. After what felt like an hour, gray light appeared ahead. They emerged, gasping, onto a high rock ledge overlooking a sea of canyons. They were exposed. Samuel pulled them back into the shadow of an overhang. "They will split up," Kai whispered, her chest heaving. "One will follow our trail, the others will go to the canyon heads to cut us off. They know this land almost as well as I do." Samuel looked at her, then at the trembling boy in her arms. The 4 children waiting with the Martinezes felt a continent away. "We need to get to my horse," he said. "It's a half-day's hard journey back and they'll be between us in it." Kai shook her head. "We cannot go back. The horse is lost. We go forward." She pointed east toward a distant, hazy line of blue mountains. "My band moves that way, if we can reach them." "If," Samuel echoed. It was a terrible plan. They had no water except the half-empty skin, no food but the few scraps in the basket, a toddler and a pursuer who wanted them dead. But staying still was death. They moved, keeping to the high ground where they could see but could also be seen. Samuel's cowboy boots were meant for stirrups, not for scrambling over slick rock, and he fell behind Kai's sure, moccasined feet. She moved like a part of the landscape itself. By midday, the sun was a hammer. They found shade in a cave. Elan drank the last of the water. Samuel shared out the dried meat. In the tense quiet, he asked the question burning in him. Why keep him? If the rule was to leave them all, why break it for him? Kai stroked Elan's hair. The boy was asleep almost instantly, exhausted. "He was the first," she said quietly. "When he was born, the grief for his father was too fresh. The band said I must leave him at the next moon. I promised I would. I wrapped him, I walked to the edge of a Mexican town, and I stood there all night and I could not let go." She looked at Samuel, her eyes hollow. "My weakness condemned him. Because I kept him, he learned to speak. He knows words. He knows my name. He remembers his father's face from stories. He is not a silent baby who can blend into a new family. He is Nakedi, and now he is a target." Samuel understood. She hadn't just broken a rule, she had created a person with an identity in a world where identity was a death sentence. Her love had made him vulnerable. The tragedy of it was perfect and awful. They were about to move again when Kai stiffened. She placed a hand flat on the rock floor. Samuel felt it too, a faint, rhythmic vibration, hooves, many of them moving fast on a canyon floor below their perch. They weren't being tracked, they were being outflanked. Kajawa's men had guessed their direction and were racing to set an ambush ahead. Their only advantage was the high ground. Kai's eyes scanned the terrain with a frantic intensity. Then she pointed to a seemingly sheer cliff face across a narrow gorge. "There. The stone ladder. It is a way down, but it is dangerous. A child has never used it." Samuel looked. He saw no ladder, only cracks and shadow. But time was up. They woke Elan and made the perilous traverse along a crumbling ledge to the base of the cliff. Up close, Samuel saw it. A series of narrow horizontal cracks and tiny ledges, like natural steps, winding down into the gloom of the gorge. It was a climb for a mountain goat, not for a man with a rifle or a woman carrying a child. Kai didn't hesitate. She tied Elan to her back with a long strip of buckskin, securing him tightly. "Follow my exact holds," she commanded and began to descend, facing the rock, finding invisible purchase with her toes and fingers. Samuel, his heart in his throat, slung his rifle across his back and followed. The rock was sharp and unforgiving. One misstep would send them plummeting 50 feet onto boulders. Halfway down, Elan, frightened by the height, began to squirm. Kai froze, whispering Apache words too low for Samuel to hear. The boy stilled. They reached the bottom, muscles trembling with strain. The gorge was a deep, cool corridor. "This way," Kai whispered, leading them at a run along a dry stream bed. For a few blessed minutes, Samuel thought they might have slipped the net. Then from ahead came the distinct sound of a horse snorting. They skidded to a halt, pressing against the gorge wall. Around a bend ahead walked two of Kajawa's warriors, leading their horses through the narrow passage. They were looking down, examining tracks in the sand, their tracks. In seconds they would look up. They were trapped. The gorge wall behind them was unscalable. Samuel gripped his rifle, knowing a shootout in this stone funnel would be suicide. Kai's hand closed around his wrist. Her touch was ice cold. She looked from the men to Elan, then to Samuel. A horrific calculation unfolded in her eyes. Then she did the unthinkable. She quickly untied Elan from her back and pressed him into Samuel's arms. Before he could protest, she pointed to a dark, low crevice in the gorge wall, a crack just wide enough for a man and child to squeeze into. "Get in. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear." Samuel understood her plan immediately. She was going to be the diversion, the rabbit to their fox. "Kai, no," he hissed. She cut him off with a look of such fierce, maternal finality that it stole his breath. "You are their father now, all five, swear it to me." It was not a request. It was a transfer of sovereignty. Samuel, holding her trembling son, could only nod. Kai touched Elan's cheek once, her fingers lingering for a fraction of a second. Then she turned and ran, not away from the warriors, but directly toward them, letting out a sharp, echoing cry. The warriors looked up, shouted, and gave chase. Samuel shoved himself and Elan into the dank, narrow crevice, pulling them deep into the shadows. He clamped a hand over Elan's mouth as the boy began to whimper. From outside they heard the sounds of pursuit, running footsteps, a shout, then a single echoing gunshot. Then silence. A silence more terrible than any noise. Elan trembled violently against him. Samuel's own eyes stung with furious, helpless tears. He had just witnessed a mother's ultimate sacrifice, and he was now the sole guardian of her 5 children, trapped in a crack in the earth with killers possibly still nearby. They waited in the dark for an eternity until the only sound was the drip of water. Samuel finally risked peering out. The gorge was empty. No Kai, no warriors, only the imprints of struggle in the sand. He had no way of knowing if she was dead or captured. His mission had catastrophically changed. He was no longer seeking answers or even rescue. He was a fugitive with a priceless, vulnerable cargo. He had to get Elan out of these canyons and back to the other 4. He had to get them all to safety before Kajawa's men, now surely aware of a white man's involvement, decided to widen their hunt beyond the Nakedi. Emerging from the crevice, Samuel assessed their position with a cowboy's practicality. They were lost. The gorge was unfamiliar. The sun was descending. They needed shelter, water, and a way east out of the labyrinth. Using the last of the daylight, he found a seep spring in the rock and let Elan drink. The boy was in shock, silent, his small hand clutching Samuel's finger with a grip that could break a heart. "We're going home, son," Samuel whispered, the word feeling both foreign and utterly true. "To your brothers and sisters." As night fell, Samuel knew they couldn't travel in the dark in this terrain. He found a shallow cave, built a tiny, well-concealed fire, and huddled with Elan for warmth. The child finally slept, exhausted. Samuel stayed awake, rifle across his knees, listening to the desert night. Every rustle was an enemy. Every shift of shadow was a warrior. The 4 infants on his porch had been a mystery. The woman in the desert had been a revelation. But this was war. And he was now squarely in the middle of it, responsible for 5 lives caught in a conflict centuries old. Just before dawn, as he was preparing to move, he heard it again, the sound of horses. But this time it was different, not the cautious tread of trackers, but the purposeful, organized movement of a group. Peering from the cave mouth, he saw them pass along a ridge above 8, maybe 10 riders, and in their midst a figure walking, her hands bound. Kai, she was alive, they had her. And they were not heading back to their own lands, they were turning south, directly toward the settlement where Samuel's ranch and his 4 other children waited. Sight of Kai, bound and walking amidst her captors, ignited a cold, clear fury in Samuel. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was a race. Kajawa's war party wasn't just hunting the remnants of a rival band. They were following a new trail, the trail of a white cowboy who had interfered and who now held something they wanted, the last Nakedi heir. Samuel looked down at Elan, asleep against his chest. The child was the key, and Samuel's ranch with 4 more Nakedi children was the prize. Every instinct told him to follow the war party to try a desperate ambush, but Kai's last command echoed in his mind. You are their father now, all 5. His duty was not to heroic vengeance, but to survival. He had to get Elan to safety, gather the other 4, and disappear before Kajawa's men arrived. He turned east, away from the warrior's path, and began to run. What followed was a brutal test of endurance. Carrying Elan with no horse and little water, Samuel pushed his body to its absolute limit. He used the stars to navigate, cutting across country in a direct line he hoped would beat the war party's longer, mounted route. He foraged for prickly pear fruit for moisture, chewed on bitter roots to stave off hunger. Elan, resilient in a way only a child of hardship could be, rarely complained, his small arms locked around Samuel's neck. In 2 days of relentless travel, a bond was forged in silence and shared exhaustion, the bond of a father and son who have only each other against the world. They reached the Martinez ranch under the cover of a moonless night. Samuel approached like a ghost, signaling with a soft whistle. Old Roberto emerged, shotgun in hand, his eyes widening at the sight of the battered cowboy and the Apache child. Inside, the 4 infants were sleeping in makeshift cribs, cared for by Roberto's wife, Carmela. The relief Samuel felt was so profound it made him lightheaded, but there was no time for rest. He explained the situation in terse, urgent sentences. Warriors coming maybe a day behind. The Martinezes, without a second of hesitation, became his army. Roberto sent his eldest son to ride to the distant sheriff, though they all knew help would arrive too late. Carmela and her daughters began packing supplies, food, blankets, medicine. They would take the children and hide in the high cellars of an abandoned mission church 10 miles to the south, a place Samuel knew well. Samuel, however, would not be going with them. They are coming to my land, he told Roberto, his voice grim. If they find it empty, they will fan out and search. They will find your trail. I have to be there. I have to make them stop at my fence line. It was a suicide plan, 1 man against a war party, but Roberto, a man who understood honor, merely nodded. We will get the children to safety, you buy the time. As the Martinezes loaded a wagon in the dark, Samuel did the hardest thing he had ever done. He kissed each of his 4 sleeping bobbies, Jonah, Lily, Ben, Sarah, on the forehead, memorizing their faces. Then he knelt before Elan. You go with Grandma Carmela. You be brave for your brothers and sisters. I will come for you. Elan looked at him with Kai's penetrating eyes, then threw his small arms around Samuel's neck and held on tight. When Carmela gently pried him away, the boy did not cry. At dawn, Samuel stood alone on his porch. He had slept for 2 hours. He had cleaned and loaded his rifle. He had strung a second wire fence inside the first. He had placed kerosene and rags at strategic points. He was not planning to win a battle. He was planning to stage a siege. A siege by 1 man. He waited. They arrived just as the sun cleared the horizon, 8 warriors on painted ponies, with Kai, still bound, walking in their midst. Their leader, Kajawa, was a broad man with a face like etched stone. They stopped at Samuel's property line, assessing the solitary cowboy on the porch, the rifle across his knees. Kajawa called out in heavily accented English. You have something that belongs to us. The woman's whelp. Give him to us and you may live. Samuel stood, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drum. He walked slowly to the edge of the porch. The children are not here, he said, his voice carrying across the quiet yard. They are safe, and you will not touch them." A ripple of anger went through the warriors. Kajawa dismounted, drawing a long knife. "Then you will die and we will find them." This was the moment. Samuel knew he could not outshoot 8 men, but he might outthink them. "You hunt children," Samuel said, loud enough for all to hear. "You call yourselves warriors. You are cowards. The Nakedi are defeated. You have their women. You have their lands. What honor is there in chasing bobbies?" He was playing a dangerous game, insulting their pride, hoping to redirect their anger from the children to him. Kajawa took a step forward, his eyes murderous. But then a voice cut through the tension. "Kai." She spoke rapidly in Apache, her words sharp and clear. Samuel couldn't understand, but he saw the effect on the men. Some looked away, ashamed. Kajawa rounded on her, shouting. She spoke again, louder, her gaze fixed not on him, but on the other warriors. Samuel later learned what she said. She told them of the 4 bobbies left in the moonlight. She told them of the white man who kept them, fed them, sang to them. She asked them if their war was so hollow that the only victory left was to slaughter innocents raised by a stranger's hand. She shamed them with the ghost of their own fathers, who once fought for families, not for extinction. A long, tense silence followed. The wind stirred the dust. Finally, an older warrior, one with streaks of gray in his hair, spoke to Kajawa, his tone weary. An argument ensued. Samuel stood his ground, rifle ready, but the fight was draining from the air, replaced by a bitter tension among the attackers themselves. The feud had exhausted them. The purpose had curdled. Kajawa, seeing the resolve waver in his own men, made a last, brutal play. He yanked Kai forward and put his knife to her throat. "The boy, or she dies now in the dirt." Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger. But before he could even speak, the old warrior who had argued grabbed Kajawa's arm. Words were exchanged, too fast and low for Samuel to catch. Then, to Samuel's shock, the old warrior stepped between Kajawa and Kai. He was not defending Samuel. He was defending the last shred of their collective honor. The internal fracture was complete. What happened next was not a battle, but a dissolution. After a final, furious stare at Samuel, Kajawa shoved Kai toward the porch, mounted his horse, and wheeled around. He and 3 loyalists rode away, back toward the canyons. The remaining 4 warriors, led by the older man, stayed. They did not lay down their weapons, but they made no hostile move. The old warrior looked at Samuel. "The woman stays with her children," he said simply. Then he looked at Kai and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was not forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement. The war for these particular lives was over. Then they too turned and rode away. Samuel rushed to Kai, cutting her bonds with shaking hands. She collapsed against him, not in weakness but in sheer, stunned release. They sat on the porch steps as the sun climbed, 2 enemies of a fatting war, united by 5 children who knew nothing of it. The aftermath was a quiet revolution. Kai moved into the ranch house. The Martinezes brought the children home. There was no legal ceremony, no official paperwork. There was simply a fact. A family now lived on the Thompson Ranch. A family of 7. Kai taught the children the stories and songs of the Nakedi. Samuel taught them how to ride and mend a fence. They learned Apache and English and the universal language of a crowded dinner table. The sheriff came, eventually, after the Martinez boys' report. He found a tired cowboy, an Apache woman, and 5 happy, healthy children. He saw no evidence of crime, only evidence of care. In the face of such a tangible, complex good, the law chose to look the other way. It was informal kinship care, a solution as old as humanity itself. The final surprise came the following spring. The old warrior who had defied Kajawa returned alone. He brought no weapons, only a small deerskin bag. He handed it to Kai. Inside were the 5 carved animals, the lark, fox, bear, badger, and one new one, a wolf, for Elan. They had been retrieved from the wickiup in the hidden valley. "The children should have them," the warrior said. "They are of the people, even if their path is different." It was a gesture of profound closure. The Nakedi band, what was left of it, had officially released its claim, blessing the new life these children had found. Samuel and Kai did not marry in any church, but one evening under a full moon, the same moon that had first brought Jonah to the porch. They stood outside with the children and made promises to each other in the quiet. Promises of shared labor, shared love, and a shared future built not on the ruins of the past, but on the sturdy, daily ground of the present. The mystery of the porch was solved. It was not a mythic test, but a mother's desperate gamble. The payoff was not treasure, but a family forged in the harsh and beautiful reality of need, sacrifice, and unexpected grace. The cowboy who loved solitude now presided over a joyful chaos. The mother who lived in shadow now stood in the sunlight, watching her children grow. And the 5 bobbies of the full moon were simply children, home at last. The story that began with a silent child on a moonlit porch ends around a crowded table in the daylight. It asks a simple, enduring question. What makes a family? Is it blood? Is it law? Or is it the quieter, more powerful bond of chosen care? Samuel and Kai's story is one of thousands that exist in the shadows of official records. It mirrors the 4,400 infants legally surrendered under safe haven laws, each a silent crisis resolved. But it also speaks to the older, deeper tradition of informal kinship, of communities and individuals stepping into the breach when life leaves a child vulnerable. This is not a story that recommends abandoning protocol or romanticizing desperation. It is a story that recognizes that sometimes the system and the heart operate in parallel, and in the space between them, real lives are built. The 5 children of the full moon grew up speaking 2 languages, knowing 2 heritages. They were not raised in the aftermath of a war, but in the quiet victory of its end. They were not reminders of a loss, but proof of what can be saved. In a very real sense, the porch that received them became a bridge between cultures, between solitudes, between a past of conflict and a future of peace. So the next time you hear a statistic about child abandonment or about informal adoption, remember that behind every number is a narrative. A story of fear, yes, but also of incredible trust. A story of loss, but also of miraculous finding. The legal framework exists to save lives, but it is the human heart that builds the home. If you found this journey from mystery to meaning compelling, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We explore the true stories behind history's greatest unknowns, where every like and comment helps us bring more of these hidden narratives to light. Thanks for listening.